Hello there, and welcome back to Shed for live from Shed 6. I've kind of got to gas a little bit and stall because I'm aware of the fact that some of you will be catching up from the video a few minutes ago, and you'll have pressed play at different times, meaning that some of you will have finished it already, and some of you will still be 5 minutes from the end. So luckily I'm able to gas it. It's funny that, isn't it? Thank you for tuning in. I know there's a hell of a lot of distractions now that lockdown's finished for everybody, unless you're like involved in music or sport, and it's just a pleasure to have your company. I realise that numbers are going to be dwindling as the year goes through, and I know this is quite a topic that sounds on the surface like it's going to be a bit dry, but trust me, this is a story that needs to be told, and I hope you're going to enjoy the next hour and a half or so. You might have noticed I've had a bit of a tidy up in here. I know Ray commented earlier that he didn't know I had shelves. I have got shelves. You just couldn't see them for junk. Most of that junk was mouldy, and I wondered why I was in a state of ill health. Apparently I was poisoning myself slowly. But the gig tonight is all for a new shed roof. For if it rains, and I hope it doesn't, you'll notice me running around with pots trying to catch it all so it doesn't flood the electrics again. Because although it looks a bit posher, it ain't. Up there it needs a new lid. So if you could see your way clear to helping me with that, that's brilliant. We're closing in on the target, and as ever, if I hit the target, any money I don't need I'm going to give away, so it'll be split between Pauline of in Ashton Underline for We Shall Overcome and the new Hull Unity shop. So I'll make sure anything I don't need gets spread around, but at the moment I just need to get this place warm and dry again. Right, a massive thank you to Brian Lavery for that introduction. I wanted him to speak because his books are so important to this story, because without them I wouldn't have been able to write them. Brian writes like I think, and so by the time I'd finished reading his books, I already had these characters in my mind and what I wanted them to do and where I wanted them to go. So it was inspired entirely by Brian. And these two books, I know you're going to see them backwards, but that one's The Luckiest 13, and this one is showing you already, the Headscarves Revolutionaries. Look them up; they are both brilliant reads, and you'll enjoy the record more for knowing those stories because they are absolutely compelling. He's a fantastic writer. I ain't got a handy quote like he has, but I really like that one about being a class warrior in a class act. That's bound for a poster, isn't it? Anyway. In the January of 2018, I stumbled into a garage to get some diesel just outside Hull, and the Hull Daily Mail front cover was carrying the pictures of 58 men who died 50 years ago that month. And I picked up that paper, and it reminded me that Brian had sent me one of his books, and I took the paper home, immediately picked up the books and read them both within about a week, which is unheard of for me because my eyes normally fail. And I wrote and recorded this album in 29 days, which is pretty fast even for me. It's an album that probably needs Rebecca to really wrench its emotional depths, and it certainly needs Commoners Choir at the end. But me being solo in my shed, I'm going to have to kind of try and do it alone. Now I'm hoping I've gassed long enough and some of you have caught up. So basically I better get started, haven't I? The first song is called Don't Say Goodbye at First Light, and I thought it was going to be the only song I wrote, but it turned out to be just the start. It's a kind of overview song. It's also a bit of a love song. It also introduces two other characters that keep cropping up throughout the record, and yeah, I better sing you it. crammed to the rafters, full of fisher lads in from the sea. Through the pints and the fights and the laughter, there was Michael and Mickey and me. I got settling day pay in my pocket, a new cowboy boots on my feet. At the pawn shop I bought back your locket, so meet me on Red Topper, Havelock Street. 3-day millionaires on a Friday, skimmed by a Sunday night. We sail on the tide Monday morning, my lord. Just don't say goodbye, a fast light. There's many a mate of mine gone now, lost in that bitter black hell. In the way you get used to living, you get used to dying as well. Lost Tony and Dave on the fifth bar, and when the Cleveland went down, that mid 3 and 3 week we lost to the deep. The winter dry eye in this town. 3-day millionaires on a Friday, skimmed by a Sunday night. We sail on the tide Monday morning, my lord. Just don't say goodbye, a fast light. So don't wave me off at the window, and I won't take a penny to see. Now we'll scramble our coins on the corner, Michael and Mickey and me. I'll be back soon with pay in my pocket, and I won't want to spend it alone. It's free week for me and no whim of the sea. We all over carry me home. 3-day millionaires on a Friday, skimmed by a Sunday night. Sail on the tide Monday morning, my lord. Just don't say goodbye, you fast light. No, we sail on the tide Monday morning, my lord. Just don't say goodbye, a fast light. Right, there's quite a lot going on in there. The essence of that is that a trawlerman would be away from home 3 weeks at a time and ashore for 3 days. And so they called them 3-day millionaires because they had a bunch of money in their pockets if they'd had a good time out there. And basically, for anybody, and probably one or two of you listening who can remember Ezel Road back in the day, it was carnage. It still is on a good night, but we'll come back to that in a little bit. But those were tough guys, you know, and there's all sorts of things alluded to in there. The triple trawler tragedy, which forms a backdrop of this record, and the superstitions, which we'll come back to later. But it's in essence a love song from a young man, and we finished the record later on with the same man reflecting on it in age. So we'll come back to that. Right, this next song, it's a type of song I write quite a lot. If you wanted to be properly posh about it, you would say they were working class vignettes. That sounds proper posh. I had to look the word up because I knew there would be a good one for it. But basically, you dip in and out of people's lives, and you try and tell their story in a moment. And all of humanity is in that moment, if you get the right moment. One thing that worries me about the generation that we have now is that everything's on the phone that I'm staring at right now. You know, everything's two-dimensional. Your whole life happens to somebody else, somewhere else. And we were bad enough at that already. We worship famous people. We don't see what's right in front of our noses. We don't notice our family. We don't notice our friends as such. We don't notice the town we live in. Everything is happening over the hill somewhere else. And what you end up doing is missing all the amazing things that happen around you. And what you see on any given street at any given time is heroism and cowardice. It's courage and bravery, and it's torment, and it's love, and it's loss, and it's happiness, and it's sadness, and it's crushing defeats and massive victories. And unless you're looking, you don't see it. So I try to write those songs to try and remind people that life is something tangible, and you need to grab hold of it, you know. So this is again, the first three songs of this album mention a pub called Uranus, which is it's a big fishing pub halfway down Ezel Road, and amidst all the carnage of your normal days, would be other emotions going on, and I wanted to catch that in this song. It's called A Rainy Day in Uranus. It was a rainy day in Uranus, my 7th day ashore. It only stopped in for a couple that turned into 3 or 4. With that storm cloud hanging over, well, I wasn't keeping score. It was a rainy day in Uranus that day. Stored a couple of pints for pigeon, just to see him right, with some lads in off the fairground who was looking for a fight, and they left there black and bloody, but they left there with their lives. It was a rainy day in Uranus that day. granted wasn't over pulled for me. There was some lads stopped a minute, some just let me be. Wasn't every day you lend you lost your only son at sea? Was a rainy day in Uranus that day. Was a rainy day in Uranus that day. It's kind of like a quiet song, but it's one of the favourite ones I've written. For me, anyway. Maybe not for you, but it's for me. Right. This is a song that really tries to capture some of the essence of that alpha male environment that was the fishing industry, you know. It's a song about the consumption of alcohol ashore, really, and about how Ezel Road was basically a drinking run for the younger shoremen. They would start at one end, Frankie's Vauxhall Tavern, and move to the Alex, and then along Ezel Road. I mean, there was a lot more pubs in them days. It was virtually impossible to drink your way from one end, but really, for the purposes of this song, I've picked the ones that are still open. So you've got the Criterion, which is known as the Cry, you've got Rainers, you've got Halfway House, and at the far end you've got Dairy Coats. And that's on the corner of Hawthorne Ave, right at the far sort of west end of the drinking run, if you like. It was madness, but you know, they had a tough job to do. They were away from home 3 weeks at a time. When they got to the fishing grounds, there were 18-hour days on deck, gutting fish in sea waters that was 20-foot high waves washing over you, Arctic blizzards blowing over you, and you had to be proper hard to do that. Not just tough, proper hard. So I first encountered these guys, well, the fishing had gone by then, but the guys were still there. When my granddad first started taking us to the rugby league at Boulevard, we went to all the FC's home games between like 1978 and 1982, and I was in absolute awe of these guys. You know, they were packed threepenny stand, and they were. Now I was a little puny kid of about 8 years old, I think I was, when I first started going down Boulevard, and I used to get pushed around at school and kicked around on my way home, and I was in absolute awe of these guys, because I just looked at them and you just knew nobody on earth was going to mess with them. You know? I kind of wanted them to be my mate, because I needed people like that. I was 8 years old, and the bullies came to get me, and I've kind of always been in awe of them. But yeah, it was a very hard job that required very tough guys, and when they let off steam, boy did they let off steam. So this is called Drinking Our Way Home. Harry's gonna meet us with a cab on the docks. You must be on the pull bill if you're changing your socks. With your hair slicked back, Jack, you pass for good one, yeah. From Vauxhall down the dairy court, we're drinking our way home. 3-week on a trawl across the Baltic Sea, by 40-foot white horses and a company, with bicycles in places sun and none don't know. From Vauxhall down the dairy court, we're drinking our way home. Yeah, Frankie's to the Alex and then on to the cry. Yeah. When rainers can't contain us, we'll drink halfway dry, and we'll be dog-tied, one rides up to the bar. Yeah, from Vauxhall down the dairy court, we're drinking our way home. Yeah. Rainers has to always and a warning shout. There's the one the wife storming, the one the lads slip out. The Arctic air has now on air, she's cold and stone. Yeah, from Vauxhall down the dairy court, we're drinking our way home. Yeah, Frankie's to the Alex and then on to the cry. Yeah, when rainers can't contain us, we'll drink halfway dry, and we'll be dog-tied, one like sold to the bone. Yeah, from Vauxhall down the dairy court, we're drinking our way home. Yeah, na 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 na, we're drinking our way home. Na 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 na, we're drinking our way home. Frankie's to the Alex and then on to the cry. Yeah, when rainers can't contain us, we'll drink halfway dry, and we'll be dog-tied, trip-wide, sold to the bone. Yeah, from Vauxhall down the dairy courts, we're drinking our way home. Doesn't take that much to kick it off in a pub. We bought the lads some of the underlings right out of the snow. Yeah, we're sister ships at sea, but they didn't leave us alone. Yeah, from Vauxhall down the dairy courts, we're drinking our way home. Ah dear, I right enjoy playing that. Okay, so that's kind of teed up the story of the trawlermen and the culture around Ezel Road at that time. The real backdrop to this story starts, I guess, on January the 10th, 1968. Two trawlers sailed on the same day, the St Romanus and the Kingston Peridot, and neither of them came back to port. The St Romanus was last heard from on January the 11th, with its young captain complaining that the ship wasn't handling very well. It's presumed to have sunk on its journey north, not long after that radio message, with a loss of 20 men. But owing to the fact that trawlers often didn't report in for weeks at a time, because they didn't want to betray their position if they were having decent time with the fishing, they didn't want to give that away. So it wasn't really reported till well into the 20s of that month, when people began to get a little bit worried about the whereabouts of the St Romanus. And in the meantime, the Kingston Peridot had also been lost. I think the 26th, 27th, Brian will correct me on that. But an empty life raft was found, and that's all that remained of the Kingston Peridot. It's presumed that she capsized, turned turtle as they called it, and that happened because they were about as far north as you could go. Old trawlers were renowned for toughing it out in the worst seas in the world, and what would happen in those seas is that the water would freeze on the superstructure, and it would form huge chunks of ice, which if you didn't whack off with whatever metal implement you could find, from axes to spanners, you name it, they would be up on that deck hammering away at that ice, because if you couldn't get that ice off, your ship would become top heavy and it would capsize and sink. And that is presumed what happened to the Kingston Peridot, but that was a loss of another 20 lives. So with the news that the St Romanus was missing and the Kingston Peridot had definitely sank, that was 40 old trawlermen lost within a couple of days in the and the community was reeling. And what happened was a bunch of women said enough was enough, and they were led by a woman called Lillian Bellocker. They called her Big Lil. She was a worker on the fish docks and didn't suffer fools. Lived on Coltman Street, and that night she sat down with a cuppa and a plate full of custard creams and started a petition which, as Brian alluded to in the introduction, soon gathered 10,000 names. Now, all at the time, the surrounding community had a population of 14,000 people. That's practically, as he says, everyone who could pick up a pen. Now, anybody who's tried to get names on a petition will know that's good going. And it spread like wildfire. It was eventually resulted in a meeting. The trawler bosses being fobbed off, but getting taken down to London to see government officials. And I'll tell that story a little bit later on, but in the meantime I'm going to sing a song called Headscarves and Hurricanes, which is the title track of the album. See, it was a very masculine society on Ezel Road in the fishing industry because there were big tough guys, but they were away a lot, so the women weren't sort of crushed. The women were tough too because they had to be father and mother to the kids. They had to keep the house and they had to work jobs themselves. So this wasn't a bunch of sort of like faint-hearted damsels in distress chained to the kitchen sink. This was tough women, and they out-toughed the men at times, but still do. Well, this song sort of gives you some insight into the whole thing about the headscarf revolutionaries and what an impact they had in a short space of time and how it came about. It sounds a little bit historical now, but it's also Jeremy Corbyn's favourite Joe Solo song. I played the Bakers Union conference a couple of years ago, and I was coming off stage as Jeremy Corbyn was coming on, and I'd just finished playing that song, and he whispered in my ear and said that I'd really enjoyed it because it was a story about people power, and people really needed to understand what power they had if they worked together, and that is in essence this song. With a cuppa and a custard cream and a biro in her hand, she lit a fire on Coltman Street and drew up her demands. Full crew on every trolley and a radio man too. No more sailing off with kids or Christmas cracker cruise. It was Lillian Bellocker and Chrissy Smallbone too. With Yvonne Blenkinsop and Mary Dennis Sue. May have had no airs and graces, been just for Westall girls, set out to change the way things worked, and went and changed the world. Like an headscarf on an hurricane, it took 'em on alone. where there is no revolution. You start one of your own. Now little an petition, well, it started in the cry and ended up in Parliament, where changes go to die. Yeah, and she told Mr. Wilson, flower, this is down to you. We've come all this way to change the law, and I'll stand it till you do. Like an headscarf on an hurricane, it took 'em all alone. Where there is no revolution, you start one of your own. Well, 50 years have gone now, and the fishing's all gone too. But when I see big little up there, a message still rings true. There are those who try to crush you and to suffocate your dreams, but revolution still start over tea and custard creams. Like an headscarf on an hurricane, it took 'em all alone. Where there is no revolution, you start one of your own. As Brian alluded to in the introduction, this isn't a story of organised labour. This is very much a story of direct action. It was very much a feudal workforce. It's not a socialist story, it's a community story. But that's not to say it is without class consciousness. As the Hazelwood Women's Committee was being formed, there was some objections to Mary de Ness being a part of that, because she was actually a skipper's wife rather than a trawlerman's wife. And Lillian Billocker answered that with something we could kind of all do to learn when we start sectioning society out into middle class, is that it only exists as an upper class construct to divide working class people. And Lillian summed that up beautifully when she said, when a trawler sinks, the skipper drowns too. That's a perfect metaphor. Think about it. Right, anyway. Now, I've only ever performed this album one time before, and that was at the Fisherman's Church on St George's Road. And I bottled out of playing this song because I didn't think I'd be able to do it. And trust me, there are some times when I run through it that I can't do it. But it's going back to the blokes. See, it was a tough world, right? At any moment you could be swept overboard, and bizarrely, the next moment you could be swept back on board, which you might think wouldn't happen, but it happened to one Grimsby bloke 3 times. And it could happen, you know, a wave and the after wave, you could be dragged off and thrown straight back on again. But also you could have the trawl. If a cable snapped, that trawl was 3/4 of a mile long. It was dragging 1/4 of a mile behind the trawler and you know, and 1/2 a mile deep, and that was under quite a lot of tension. And if one of them cables snapped, it could cut your head off, cut you in half, throw you overboard, you name it. But not all of them 3 weeks were fishing, because they had to first go north and they had to come back south again, right? So only the middle part of the 3 weeks was actually fishing. Now the journey north was called steaming out, and it kind of involved a little bit of hair of the dog from drinking their way back home and out again. Many a bottle chinked, many a game of cards ended in a fight, and yeah, it was slightly less dark and macabre than you might imagine. Alcohol was involved. We're gonna do it again, we're on a steam out. Fisher lads are on a steam out. And Michael's halfway through a party 10 on Mickey's rum again, oh yeah. We're gonna do it again, we're on a steam out. Come on boys, we're on a steam out. The way you're playing dominoes, it ought to be a contact sport, oh yeah. We're gonna do it again. We're on a steam out. Fisher boys are on a steam out. That crackle coming in on Caroline is in 2-2 time, oh yeah. We're gonna do it again, we're on a steam out. Come on boys, we're on a steam out. The tequila rolls a fag and fails in a forsaken, oh yeah. We're gonna do it again. We're on a steam out. Come on boys, we're on a steam out. It's like a scream down at the boulevard with Mickey's pack of cards, oh yeah. We're gonna do it again, we're on a steam out. Fisher boys are on a steam out. And Cooker's got a pot of bacon broth, and then we'll sleep it off, oh yeah. We're gonna do it again, 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 oh yeah. We're gonna do it again. Right. Just as a sort of like little bit of songwriting thing going on there, the hardest songs to remember are the ones that repeat sections. So, you know, because that's not really got a chorus. It's really difficult to remember all them words, because they just kind of, the verses just keep coming one after the other, and you've got no changes that give you like a little bit of muscle memory. It's a proper nightmare remembering that. So I probably played that about as drunk as they were. While the men were suffering such difficulties. The wives were doing their best to keep them alive by going through a series of rituals and superstitions that I absolutely love. For this song, I've got to thank Dr. Alec Gill, who was an Ezelroad historian and a fantastic writer, and his book Superstitions informed all this. Because a lot of the superstitions of fishermen are pre-biblical, pre-Christian, and they we're superstitious in ways we don't even really see, because it's so embedded in our DNA that that is quite fascinating. Now, fishing communities, by and large, all around the world, have a similar set of superstitions which connect them, but Ezelroad threw in a few more for the sake of it, I think. And I sing this song not out of mockery, but out of great respect, because I absolutely love this stuff, and I think it shows in the song. I want to dedicate this to Rebecca, because the last time I played this live, I made such a mess of it, and she didn't know whether to follow me or not. And thankfully tonight, if I make a cock up, I can just iron over it myself. But yeah, one of the superstitions that nobody was able to explain is why you had to throw one slipper at the front door as your man left it, and had to hit the front door as he was closing it, because that was going to keep him alive. Nobody knows why. But the other one to watch out for in this song is the bloke who kind of bucked the trend, because cats were deemed unlucky. You weren't meant to have a cat on board ship. But this particular bloke was quite the opposite. He wouldn't sail without a cat, and so he would absolutely make sure whenever he went on board a trawler that a cat went with him. Now, problem was, if he couldn't find his own cat, he wasn't averse to taking someone else's. So having chuckled quite a bit at that story, I had to write him into the song. So he gets a line all his own, which in the grand tradition of unsubtle Joe Solo songs, well, basically it's signalled from a long way off. but I enjoy it all the same. So this is called Sailing Day. And it's an incredible juxtaposition. The reason I put these two songs together is that I'm just imagining the sort of the wives sort of, oh my God, I've got to follow these rituals to keep the man alive. Oh, my man won't return to me if I don't do X, Y, and Z. And on board a ship, just steaming past Flambered, is a bloke absolutely battered on rum he had hidden in his bag. But such was the way of life. Take it from me, love, and don't wash his clothes now. If you wash his clothes now, you'll wash him away. Take it from me, love, and don't wash his clothes now. Don't wash his clothes now on the sailing day. Take it from me, love, don't empty that ashtray. You empty that ashtray, you throw him away. Take it from me, love, don't empty that ashtray. Don't empty that ashtray on sailing day. Don't ever whistle and never wear green. Go one more or one less, but never 13. Throw one slipper after him, don't ask me why. And say, see you later, love, never goodbye. Take it wave at the window. You do that, a wave will come washing away. Take it from me, love, don't wave at the window. Don't wave at the window on sailing day. Don't ever whistle and never wear green. Go one more or one less, but never 13. Throw one slipper after him, don't ask me why. And say see you later, love, never goodbye. Rabbits, spell out P1Gs. Step on them quick if you drop your dog keys. Have no more than 2 sheets on line at a time. And keep the cat safe from him at number 99. And don't ever whistle and never wear green. Go one more or one less, but never 13. Throw one slipper after him, don't ask me why. And say see you later, love, never goodbye. Say see you later, love, never goodbye. This song is essentially about PTSD. But working class people don't get PTSD. There are the support services available to get that diagnosis, or we won't go looking anyway. Now we don't get PTSD. We might be prone to bouts of depression, shut ourselves away in dark rooms, might have issues with alcohol or drugs, be prone to fits of temper, violent outbursts, sleepless nights, screaming in our sleep. We might shake uncontrollably in the street. But we don't get PTSD. The third ship to be lost was a ship called the Ross Cleveland. One of the worst storms in living memory blew in the early days of February 1968. And the weather got so atrocious that every trawler in the area made a beeline for the shelter of Isafjord in Iceland, like an inland sea where to be out the west of the wind, except the weather was so bad that even there was no shelter. The Ross Cleveland's radar packed up, it froze. So you've kind of been guided from the bridge of a nearby trawler at Kingston Anderler site. And the two skippers, Phil Gay on the Ross Cleveland and Len Were on the Anderler site, were friends, and they were in radio contact. could see each other, the lights, getting buffeted around. Without his radar, it was a struggle. So 2 men went out on deck and were hammering away at the radar with axes until it freed up and made the way back into the bridge. But just as they did, a giant wave hit them on the starboard side and threw the ship over on its side. The skipper, Phil Gay, he tried to right it, but the wheel had no power at all. He shouted down for full steam ahead off the engine room, but it was too late. And he let off a last radio message that was picked up by the other ships that said, "Help me, we're laying over. Help me, Len. Give my love and the crew's love to the wives and to the families." And that was that. The blip disappeared off the Andalusite's radar. The light went out and the Ross Cleveland had gone. And this is the PTSD story of a man who had that radio message come through. It's called The Lucky Ones. I have good days and I have bad days. Pass the ashtray, the whiskey and the glasses. I have good days and I have bad days. Shut the door, son, keep it from the lasses. I drink a little more than I should. I sit in here a lot alone. I have good days and I have bad days, but I'm one of the lucky ones. I have good days and I have bad days. This kind of year that goes, so come and find me. I have good days and I have bad days. Don't you dare say to put it all behind me. Give our love to the wives and to the children. Was the last sweat anyone had. I have good days and I have bad days, but I'm one of the lucky ones. Right, this next song continues on from that. It's two songs that are written with the titles from newspaper headlines. Back in the day, journalists actually had to be writers as well, you know, so they were kind of masters of the craft. They knew how to draw your attention in with headlines and with names and by weaving stories. Nowadays, journalists just do what they're told by editors, you know, and half the journalists in the country basically just paraphrase a press release and put it out there under their own name. But in them days, you actually had to be a writer, and basically this song is the story of the first mate of the Ross Cleveland, a guy called Harry Edam, who wound up being the sole survivor of the triple trawler tragedy. See, Harry was one of the two men who were out on deck hammering the ice off the Ross Cleveland's radar, and had only just got back into the bridge when that wave struck. So he climbed out on deck with the boatswain Wally Hewitt, and they made their way towards one of the life rafts. Now, as Harry was approaching it, he saw a third man there who looked like he was naked, but all of a sudden he felt a jolt, and he'd been knocked cold by the dinghy expanding and thrown into the water, unconscious. He was dragged onto the life raft by that third man, a young lad, a deckhand, 18-year-old lad called Barry Rogers, and he was pulled from the water and had his life saved by Barry. And what Harry noticed was that Barry wasn't naked, but he was just in a pair of long johns. He'd been down below, you know, and he was already suffering the worst effects. We were talking hurricane force winds, driving blizzard snow, you know, 30-foot waves, 120 miles an hour gusts, and he was already, you know, starting to suffer that. As the night went on, Barry Rogers succumbed to the cold, and Wally Hewitt not long behind him. But Harry was lucky in that, because he'd been out on the deck hammering at the radar with an axe, he was still in his outdoor gear when the Cleveland sank. So he was the only one dressed to withstand the night. And Harry sailed around for hours in that dinghy, just being bobbed around by the waves, blown miles down Eslifiorda, and with the corpses of his crewmates, including the lad who saved his life. Eventually, some point to think about this, that was the Sunday night, 12:10 in the morning, 10 past midnight, when the Cleveland rolled over. And it was probably dusk on the Monday when the dinghy was washed ashore, but Harry kind of dragged the dinghy up onto the rocky beach out of the waves, and knew that if he sat down he would die. You know, he was already suffering from exposure. His hands were ripped raw, and he was freezing to death. He knew if he stayed there he would die, and he saw a light in the distance, and he started to make his way for it. And it was like rocky outcrops, and you know, it was pitch black. There's hurricane force winds blowing, driving rain and snow. And Harry Edam walked the best part of 9 miles across this kind of terrain, at one point having to scale a sheer rocky cliff, and headed towards that light. eventually reaching what he thought was the source of that light, which turned out to be a boarded up cabin. And in his despair, he could go no further. He couldn't get in that building, he wasn't strong enough, his hands were ripped to shreds, his feet were literally freezing. And he knew that if he sat down or laid down he would die, and he wanted desperately to be back home to his wife and his kid. And so he slept stood up so that he wouldn't succumb. He was discovered by a farmer's son the following morning, 36 hours since the Cleveland had rolled. Harry Eden was found and taken back to a farmhouse and given soup and coffee and warm dry clothes in front of a fire by an Icelandic family and brought back to life. Back home, his wife Rita and their young daughter Natalie, they'd already been informed that the Cleveland had sank and that Harry had been lost at sea. And when the news broke that he'd been found, the press, they called Rita the 36-hour widow, and they called Harry the man who came back from the sea. I know you don't write love songs, but I still think that's a shame. You're in many ways a fool, son, but that's how you play the game. If you ever need a story, then the favourite one for me is the 36-hour widow and the man who came back from the sea. His name was Harry Eden, and he'd rose to be first mate. He were right there on the Cleveland when she sank in 68, and 18 hands died with her, but that sad end went to be for the 36-hour widow and the man who came back from the sea. See, Harry'd made a life raft, and that raft was washed ashore, staggered 9 miles through a blizzard, fell down at a farmer's door. Back home is lovely Rita, she was soon to come to be the 36-hour widow to the man who came back from the sea. I know you don't write love songs, but when I think back to that year, and when Harry kissed his Rita, I'm still fighting back a tear. And I'm a tough old man, son, so that don't come easily. But for the 36-hour widow and the man who came back from the sea. there's a really sweet photograph of Harry and Rita Edom kissing that that I shared on in the group earlier on, and I kind of, something's bugged me about it for you know, for a couple of years, and I realised what it is. It looks like a Hollywood kiss, you know. It looks properly silver screen, and it struck me that it is. That's Harry and Rita being egged on to kiss by the gathering press, isn't it? You know, they've all gone, oh, give her a kiss, give us a photograph, come on, give her a kiss. And Harry and Rita have kissed for the cameras. So it's exactly the same as the silver screen moment. But it's a working class silver screen moment, you know? And I think somehow that makes it more poignant. This is kind of where my path crosses with the story, I guess, because when I was a kid, me dad used to leave us during the summer holidays. He would leave us at the workshop where he worked. He did what I do now, you know. He mended stuff, and he used to work out of a shop at the top end of Hawthorne Ave on Allenby Road, and he would leave me in the back with a list of instructions on how to mend these fridges, and there's me like about 10 years old trying to figure out how to do it. And the receptionist who worked in the front of the shop was a woman called Teresa, you know, a nice lady, you know, but I, you know, obviously I was 10 years old, I was a bit petrified, you know. And when I started writing this record, my dad said, well, you've got a connection here. He said, when I used to leave you there, you remember Teresa, the receptionist? I said, yeah, I remember Teresa, the receptionist. He said, well, Teresa's married name was Gay. She was Phil Gay, the Ross Cleveland skipper's wife. And you know, all of a sudden the world felt really small. And my granddad, my dad's dad, he works on all his trawlers. He was a sparky for Humber St Andrews, so he had his offices where he kept all his stuff was in the Lord Line building that's still left standing there, I think, on what remains of the docks. And when my granddad was getting older towards retirement, my dad would finish work and he would join him and fix stuff, and that's how come he knew Phil Gay and Teresa. But the world felt, you know, incredibly small, and I felt really attached to these songs in a totally different way, you know. It's quite emotional, really. In a modern parlance, totes emotion. I believe there's probably an emoji for it. But anyway, while the news of Harry Edom being found alive was breaking, our Headscarves revolutionaries were boarding the 755 out of Paragon Station, bound for King's Cross to meet government officials with a list of 88 demands. They'd been fobbed off by the trawler owners the day before, but were in no mood to be fobbed off again. There was only 3 of them went. Lillian Ballocker, Yvonne Blenkinsop and Mary Ness travelled because Chrissy Smallbone, who'd already lost a nephew on the St Romanus, had now lost a brother because Chrissy Smallbone's maiden name was Gay, and Philip Gay, Ross Cleveland's skipper, was her brother, and she was rightly obviously devastated and stayed behind to be with her family. But them 3 old lasses, they got on board that train and they changed the world. So everywhere they went, there was newspaper sandwich boards bearing the headline for that day, and the headline for that day was Big Lil Hits Town. town and landed just like an hand grenade on the 7:55 from Hull. Oh well, one step to end, I'll end up it's hearing it. Whatever happened next, it wouldn't be dull. Just three old lasses with the best diamante on, and acts all acting like they're cracking a chord. Been dealt and handed down here up in the Anteon. Don't bet against the lass from Ezel Road. Big Lily's town, Big Lily's town, and the headline. Big Lily's town, the newsroom told the artist, hold the front page. We ain't come all this way and not get an answer, love. I'm dressed in Sunday best on Tuesday for nought. I tell you now, we're in no mood for a chance of love. We'll stay down here until we've hammered it out. King's Cross had seen now like it since Beatlemania. Lily Von and Mary stole the hearts of the world. All's a lot like London, only colder and rainier, but it gets the best out of its West End girls. Big Lily's town, Big Lily's town, and the headline. Big Lily's town, the newsroom told the artist, hold the front page. Town and landed just like an hand grenade on the 7:55 from Hull. So that's the story of the Headscarves revolutionaries. Basically, they met government officials that day, and three old lasses handed over 88 demands of the trawler industry. And all 88 were accepted by the British government and became maritime safety law today. There are thousands and thousands of people walking this earth because of what three old lasses did that day, February the 6th, 1968. So what became of them then? Well, Chrissy Smallbone became Chrissy Jensen, and she carried on campaigning. She campaigned for universal union membership for trawlermen, and she campaigned for redundancy pay for trawlermen who've been employed by the Ministry of Defence spying on Russian vessels. She got an MBE, and she died in 2001. Mary Deness, she also got divorced. She went to be a school nurse, and eventually she was matron at Eton when Princes William and Harry were there. She retired to a nursing home in Lincolnshire, and was around to see the start of the commemorations of what she'd achieved. She died in 2017. Yvonne Blenkinsop's still alive and kicking, and if you get a chance to watch some of the footage when she's jabbing her finger at the assembled press outside the Hellier's offices, it's a sight to behold. That is one true working class lass telling them how it is. Watch it, it's great. Yvonne, I've never met her, but I would love to, because proper firebrand. She was punched in the face by a trawlerman for messing in men's business. You know, such was the animosity from some areas of the community towards what the women were doing and daring to do. You know, yeah, she's campaigned still today and was awarded the Freedom of the City of Hull a couple of years ago. And bless her, fantastic woman. And Lillian Ballocker, well, it's the saddest story of them all, I guess. She became a caricature, a figure of fun in the press when her misogyny and her sexism kicked in. And she returned to Hull to find that she'd been fired from her job on the fish docks for taking 3 weeks unpaid leave during the campaign. She was blacklisted and never worked in the fishing industry again. It took her 2 years to find another job, and when she did, it was a menial thing. Her blacklisting was raised in Parliament, but the news cycle had moved on and nobody was interested. And as Hull's fishing industry went into decline and died, some blamed her for what had happened, and basically the story of what they'd achieved just passed away into history until Brian came along with his book and rightly made it a story that everybody should learn about. There's a little bit of politics involved in all that. You see, the reason the press turned on Lil Ballocker so much in after what she'd achieved is part of the process of putting working class people back in their place. It's the establishment's set up to do just that, and they can't have everybody coming out and making demands, so they ridicule you and they put you down and they dismiss you and they stop you gaining any kind of toehold that might inspire other people to do what you've just done. It's part of a recognised process if you know what you're looking for, but she was victim to that. But you know, it's not a negative story. That's just what happens with working class people. Our history takes a little bit longer to be written. It comes at you in the form of books and in plays and in poetry and in songs, and we learn about our history in different ways to the by rote textbooks that they teach you their history. And this is just a part of that process, and I'm really, really proud to be a part of that process. And whenever I'm in Hull, I'll always drive down Ezel Road from the east to the west, and 3/4 of the way down these days you will see a 50-foot high mural bearing Lillian Ballocker's face staring out towards the River Humber, staring out to where the fish docks was. And every time I pass it, I'm inspired by that, and that is the way that working class people write their own history. Right, we're moving towards the end of this record, and we'll come back in with the narrator in the first song. I told you at the start that he was that the first song was him reflecting in youth, and this is him reflecting as an old man. It's a conceit as a songwriter I really love. It's old man, young man songs. There's a lot you can do with them, and this is my favourite one of the ones I've written. This is the narrator of that first song talking to his grandson over a hospital bed in which his wife lies unconscious, and he's reflecting on his life, their life together, and the fishing industry, and basically his life. And it's something I love is writing in the way people speak. It's quite hard to do. It sounds really simple. It sounds simplistic. You're not really writing lyrics, Joe. It's not really poetry. There's not really many metaphors or similes or all the things that will. But it's actually quite hard to write a conversation, and it's something I love. And this took some time to do, but I was really pleased with it when it finished. What it tells a story of is a community lost. I alluded to this when I did the Miners Strike album, the Never Be Defeated gig at Live from Shed 3, and it's how over the last 40 years our entire way of life as a class has been changed, and with the loss of heavy industry and with the loss of mass manufacture, the whole makeup of our communities has changed. The whole thing that bonded us to the streets that we walked down and bonded us to our communities and to each other has been taken away. And now that we no longer have that binding us together, we have slowly begun to fall apart. And the two things are not unrelated. The two things are a direct consequence of UK economic policy. Our communities are the way they are because of what has been done to our industries and our manufacturing, and you cannot remove the one from the other. If you do, you're completely missing what's happening to you and what's happening to the world, and down that route more of the same comes, you know. You need to get aware of this stuff, and sometimes it's just easier to tell that story through the eyes of one bloke, just distill it down to one person's experience. So this is called The Queen of Bean Street. It's essentially a love song to not only a person but to an entire way of life. I was knee-high to your knee when me daddy died at sea. Been the eldest, well, I had to be the NA. And a sympathetic mate of me father said it's fit. See the ship I'm on, we need a decky liner. Well, I learned some things alright, like how to keep a fag alight. If it went out, then they called you a beginner. And when the waves hit 20 foot, you felt a lurching in your gut. And those young'uns, we'd kiss goodbye to our dinner. Now the captain's name was Jack, and his mood were always black, and he slicked his hair back like a rock and roller. And the rumours, they were rife, his fishing so upset his wife that she kept her dozen men to help console her. The first mate with Charlie Town, he had a weakness for the brown, and when his wind were up, the wisest would avoid him. And there were Bryn who come from Wales and reckoned he was hard as nails, so we called him Scotty just 'cause it annoyed him. I asked your nan to be me wife, and son, I've loved her all me life. See to me she'll always be the Queen of Bean Street. And from the day she wore my ring, I wouldn't change a single thing. Not to be the king or owner of the old fleet. She saw big little Vicky all was with her right there through it all. She was an headscarf revolutionary or nan. But see, I'd many a close shave, but she's a different kind of brave. They made your granddaddy a very proud man. And there was Michael, my best mate. He used to jump on at the gate with his fags, a change of clothes and a clank of bottles. We used to say one day you'll slip, in many ways you're like this ship. You neither I see where the at full throttle. But there came the fateful night, the sea rose up and proved us right. And one too many snifters, well, it cost him. He was taken from the rail in a great big bloody gale. Though me and Mickey tried, we knew that we had lost him. The fishing's gone now, son. City lost and someone won. It's all money now and everything's a venture. And the cry has locked its doors, and all the rest are in the wars. And St Andrew's docks, a bloody shopping centre. Ah, but when we put to sea, we was one great big family. Though we took orders that a fool had never followed. They led us a merry dance, but son, given half a chance, I would pack me bags and sail out there tomorrow. And that brings us to the final track. I hope you've got something out of this. I said at the top, and probably the sales of this album would testify to the fact that that it might be a subject that puts people off, but it's very, very relevant to the times we're living in today. I'll say a little bit more about that after I finish singing the last song. I've got a very special dedication to make here because my friend and comrade Dave Wood from Ulverston passed away week before last. He'd been told he had a month to live, and this gig was 5 weeks away, and I told him that if he made it this far I would sing Holloway Boys for him. Sadly he didn't, but a promise is a promise. Dave asked me to play Ulverston years and years ago now, 2012 or something, and he showed me around the town, and it was a lovely bloke. When We Shall Overcome came along, he was the first person to volunteer, and he's run dozens of events over there helping people out, stocking up food banks. In the last few years he's been campaigning and working for fairness, refugee support, and getting involved with helping families of refugees over in this country and helping them become acclimatised, and the Lockdown Solidarity campaign this week is for that in Dave's name, for fairness refugee support. So if you can see your way to buying merch off my Bandcamp, please do. It'll go there, and as I say, that's all in Dave's name. It's a massive sad loss to his friends and his family, but to his community too, because he was a real tireless, sleeves rolled up socialist, not somebody who quotes from books, but somebody who got stuck in, you know. And I've always got more time for them people, because that's what I think socialism is: action, not words. And so this is going out to Dave. It's a song I sang on a record with Commoners Choir, and they're Missing. And I'd dearly love you to all be singing along at home, and the idea of you singing along with this chorus and singing Dave on his way would be fantastic. The song is in essence the crew of a ghost ship. See, over its time as a fishing port, Hull lost 6,000 men, and I've kind of wanted them all to be caught in a moment for all eternity. And the moment I could think of that you would be at your most, the most sort of pleasure that you would find would be the moment you stopped fishing and turned for home, because you'd been out on them decks, sometimes 24-hour shifts if the fishing was good, but certainly 18-hour shifts in all that weather. And when the troll came in, the last troll came in, and the job was done, and you turned round and sailed for home, you'd sleep like a log for a start. But I figured that moment would be the moment as a trawlerman you'd want to be caught in. So that's what this song is. They don't know that they're a ghost ship, but they are. It's called Holloway Boys. Holloway boys, haul in the trawl boys, splice off the ice or we'll sink like a stone. Holloway boys, haul in the trawl boys, haul in the trawl and let's head off for home. Holloway boys, and ride the white horses and face down the gale, and let's pray, boys. Pray for the sail, boys. Pray for the sail. I pray for Holloway boys. Haul in the trawl, boys. Splice off the ice or we'll sink like a stone. Holloway. Haul in the trawl, boys, haul in the trawl and let's head off for home. Holloway boys, to the wives and the children, the lives that depended on us getting home to that town, boys. The town we were born in, a town now in mourning for all that we've known. All away, boys, all in the trawl, boys. Splice off the ice or we'll sink like a stone. All away, boys, all in the trawl, boys, all in the trawl, and let's head off for home. All away, for 6,000 men, boys, 6,000 men like us perished at sea. We're all caught now, caught in this moment, caught in this moment for eternity. All away, boys, all in the trawl, boys. Splice off the ice or we'll sink like a stone. All away, boys, all in the trawl, boys, all in the trawl, and let's head off for home. Thanks for sticking with the gig tonight. Thanks for being here. Thanks for supporting live from Shed 5. And if you have been able to donate to me new lid, then thank you for that too. I think the twin stories that that informed this album resonate in ways that that are very pertinent to the times we're living in. See, the triple trawler tragedy happened because there was no health and safety. And in times where increasingly you hear about red tape and you hear about health and safety gone mad, it's worth reminding ourselves that 58 men, 58 sons, 58 brothers, 58 fathers and husbands died because there was no red tape. And what the Headscarves revolutionaries demonstrate is that community solidarity and direct action mean that we are not powerless as people, we are not powerless as a class. We might have simple, humble beginnings, but we can be every bit as powerful as the so-called mighty. And when the next revolution comes along, when the next revolutionary act starts, it's likely to start in just the same way, you know, with a cup of tea and a custard cream. Good night.